On Friday, December 8th, the New York v. Jonathan Majors trial entered day 5 of the substantive trial. This, of course, is the case where the actor is accused of physically assaulting his then-girlfriend Grace Jabbari on the night of March 24th/morning of March 25th, 2023. If you're new to this case, I highly recommend that you start from the beginning, and to help you out, I have linked in the description below to a playlist of videos to get you all caught up. Otherwise, the jury has been spending the last 3 court days with Grace Jabbari. On day 4, they went through a ton of video surveillance footage, and I do really think that the defense did a good job of highlighting Jabbari's inconsistencies. On day 5, the prosecution did their redirect of Jabbari before they turned to other witnesses. And there were some fireworks that came out on day 5 because there were some damaging text messages by Majors that were presented to the jury. Now, just how damaging those text messages are will depend on a number of things. But before we get into that, let's talk more generally about redirects. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that redirect is where the side that originally called the witness has the ability to sort of clean up after the witness went on cross-examination a little bit. In any cross-examination, there generally will be a number of points that the other side has scored to really test the witness's credibility and reliability. And so redirect is all about addressing the most important pieces where, for example, the other side maybe drew out some information and maybe the side that originally called her wants to add some much needed context. And in this case, the biggest thing to come out on redirect was a series of text messages that was sent between Majors and Jabbari regarding some other incident that happened in September 2022. These text messages were previously not allowed in, but after her cross-examination, the judge said that the defense opened the door to these texts and so allowed them in on redirect. I will get into the nitty-gritty of the rules of evidence around this in just a moment, but first I want to get into what these texts were all about in the first place. So here's apparently what happened. In September 2022, Jabbari apparently got injured from something. What exactly caused her injuries on this date is up for debate and honestly some speculation. What we do know is that they exchanged a series of text messages afterwards when Jabbari seems to have indicated that she wanted to go and get medical treatment for these injuries, and Majors tried to dissuade her from doing so. And before we go any further, just a quick heads up, we are going to be getting into some details involving talk of self-unaliving, which can be difficult for some to encounter. And because YouTube does not like certain words around this subject, I am censoring those words myself by replacing them with unalive or unaliving. So when you hear those specific words, know that that is my personal censorship. No one in this text exchange ever used that specific term. Anyway, here are the text messages that were displayed to the jury and read aloud in court on Jabbari's redirect. By text, Majors said, "I fear you have no perspective of what could happen if you go to the hospital. They will ask you questions, and as I don't think you actually protect us, it could lead to investigation even if you do lie, and they suspect something." He also said it's just fake, but there wasn't enough context provided in court to say what exactly he was saying in the text messages that was fake. Regardless, the text messages continue with Jabbari responding, "I will tell the doctor I bumped my head if I go. I'm going to give it one more day, but I can't sleep and I need some stronger painkillers. That's all. Why would I tell them what really happened when it's clear I want to be with you?" Then he reportedly responded by threatening to unalive himself, saying, "Last night I considered unaliving myself versus coming home. I need love too. Or maybe I'm such a monster and horrible man, I don't deserve it. And I should just unalive myself. In this way, my existence is miserable. I want to die." Then she said, "I will not go to the doctor if you don't feel safe with me doing so or don't trust me to do so. I promise you I would never mention you, but understand your fear." Then he reportedly told her that she couldn't reject his love, and he admonished her for not hugging her after the alleged fight. And he said, "I will probably unalive myself. It's not really contemplating anymore. I'm a monster, a horrible man, not capable of love. I'm unaliving myself soon." Then Jabbari responded by noting her error in not hugging him and saying, "Jonathan, you can't say this. I'm going to have to tell someone." So for one thing, this does appear to corroborate what Jabbari was saying before about Majors periodically threatening to unalive himself when they would get in fights. And this could be because he was genuinely in this kind of a depressive state, really actually feeling this way, or it could be evidence of his emotional manipulation and control of Jabbari. And I am sure that opinions will vary extremely widely on this particular point. And the lie that they're referring to in these text messages seems to be about how she got her injury or injuries. And the way that she got these injuries seems to be something that in the very least would give the appearance that Majors had somehow harmed Jabbari. Now, a lot of publications have been running with the headline that Majors appears to be admitting to physically attacking Jabbari in this previous incident. It can be interpreted that way by the way that the conversation lays itself out, especially where he describes himself as a monster that is incapable of love. But his self-perception as this monster could be based on other things that he doesn't like about himself that maybe are not things that other people would see as being a reason to call someone a monster. He clearly is using some very emotional and dramatic language, so his perception of himself could be way off due to some emotional health issue. And to conclude one way or another on this particular point does require some amount of speculation here, which can range from healthy to dubious. But there could be other reasons why Majors is afraid of Jabbari going to get her injuries examined. And this does have to do with the perception of how quickly incidents like this end up with a person of color, especially a man, especially a Black man, being arrested regardless of whether or not he actually did anything wrong. Now, let's take a step back for just a moment, because whether or not you believe that it's actually the case that Black men get arrested more quickly than other demographics is not what I'm talking about here, and it's not what matters here. What matters here is whether or not you think that Majors could have a subjective anxiety around that possibility. And personally, I think that's definitely possible. I mean, Jabbari basically testified to that a couple times now. Now, whether he's using that as an excuse to manipulate and control Jabbari might be up for argument. But there definitely is some evidence here that suggests that he carries some anxiety around the subject. But either way, on this question of what it means about the underlying September 2022 incident, does it show that Majors physically attacked Jabbari? Looking online, people are definitely making some conclusions about this. But what the jury thinks about this could very well turn on how well they've been paying attention throughout Jabbari's testimony. Particularly, remember that on direct examination, she said that before March 25th, Majors had never laid hands on her during her relationship. Now, if I'm the defense attorney here, I'm not necessarily going to want to bring that up on a cross-examination of Jabbari. And that's because doing so could give Jabbari an opportunity to either make an adjustment to her prior testimony or to give the prosecution an even bigger opportunity to give Jabbari an opportunity to do so. In other words, opportunities would be abound. And what I'm getting at is this could muddy up that statement that she already made in front of the jury, which at this point is actually pretty solidly helpful for the defense so long as the jury has a recollection of it. Rather, if I'm the defense attorney here, I would wait until closing arguments to bring up this testimony in connection with the September 2022 incident. And in closing arguments, I would say, look, the state wants you to believe that there was some sort of a physical altercation between Majors and Jabbari back in September 2022, but Jabbari could have said that Majors had physically attacked her numerous times in their relationship. However, she never said that when she was up here on her direct examination. She talked about him throwing candles at the wall, breaking glass. She talked about him wanting her to modify her behavior because it reflected poorly on him. However, she never once said there was this one incident in September 2022 when he also physically attacked me. In fact, she actually said that before March 25th, Majors had never laid a hand on her. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't let the prosecution fool you into believing that there was a prior attack because they've suggested it with this text exchange. Okay, now let's get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty of the rules of evidence here. How did these courtroom developments happen in the first place? Initially, these text messages weren't allowed in on direct examination, but then cross-examination somehow opened the door to them. Some have called this a massive blunder by the defense, but is that an accurate characterization of this whole situation? So why were they not allowed in initially, and how and why did that change? The answer to this has to do with the rules of evidence and specifically the New York State rules of evidence. So on that note, let's back up for a minute because we need to talk about the rules around character evidence, also known as propensity evidence. In New York, as in most states, evidence of a separate crime or wrongful act cannot be admitted for the purpose of proving that the same specific thing happened in this alleged instance, which is entirely unrelated from that other event. And the idea behind that is we don't want to be convicting people on the basis of some collateral incident, or even because they committed some kind of a wrongful act at some point in the past. But there are exceptions to this rule. And in New York, this kind of evidence can actually be admissible if it's A, more probative than prejudicial to prove something other than the defendant's character, and B, that other thing, the other reason for presenting it to the jury, falls into one of a number of categories, including motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, common scheme or plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake or accident, or one of the following: conduct that is inextricably interwoven with the charged acts, information that is necessary for background or explanation, or information needed to complete the narrative of the subject, event, or matter. And so what happened here is, in the very beginning, the prosecution, of course, wanted to admit this text exchange. It's good for the prosecution, arguably. But Judge Gaffey said, sorry, this is impermissible character evidence if you present it on direct examination. And I think that's correct. The only reason to admit the text on direct examination would have been for the proposition that Majors did something like this once in the past. But now, on cross-examination, the defense called into question a number of things Jabbari had said in her direct examination. And one of those things was the idea that Jabbari had wanted to protect Majors, and that was why she didn't tell the first responders who first showed up to her apartment how she got the injuries that were sustained on March 24th/25th. And here the judge told the defense that when Ms. Chaudhry, the defense attorney, dug into this line of questioning on cross-examination, she was impugning Jabbari's character, even though they knew that there might be some other reason that she was not forthcoming with this kind of information. To be clear, the judge here is not making any kind of conclusions as to what actually happened, whether that was on March 25th or in September 2022. Rather, the judge is saying that if the defense is going to go this route of questioning whether Jabbari was sincerely trying to protect Majors or whether she later came up with that explanation out of thin air, then the state has to have an opportunity to rebut that with these text messages. And that's because they do provide some necessary background information or explanation to contextualize this particular issue. So this fits into one of the exceptions to the rule against character evidence, and therefore it's allowed in. So is this a huge blunder by the defense? Given the damage that these texts might cause, I can see how some people might think that. But to me, this actually feels more like a calculated risk that the defense took in deciding to go down that line of questioning about Jabbari either protecting Majors or coming up with a hoax later. I can't see how the defense could have sat back and not asked about the number of times that she said in the next morning's body cam footage, "I don't know how this happened." It's pretty central to the defense's main argument, so I don't see how this really could have been avoided by the defense except for deciding to forego this area entirely. So while I have been critical of some of the defense's decisions in this trial, no, I don't call this particular decision a blunder or an unforced error by the defense. Now, before we close out on Jabbari's testimony, there are a couple other things that they did touch on redirect. One of these was the subject of Majors pushing Jabbari into the car at the end of the alleged incident. On redirect, she apparently described him as actually picking her up and throwing her against the car. This is interesting to me because the jury has the actual surveillance footage to compare her description and her characterization of this event to. And if this characterization by Jabbari does not line up with how the jurors can themselves characterize the surveillance footage, that's only going to harm her. Anyway, they also talked on redirect about pain and specifically when she did and did not feel pain. On redirect, she was now saying that she first felt pain in the middle of the altercation. Although some might interpret that as sort of cleaning up her answer about this subject, others might look at that as a total inconsistency. And honestly, on these 2 points, both pain and whether Majors pushed her into the car or picked her up and slammed her against the car, essentially, I personally think that the prosecution would have been much better off not digging into them on redirect. Although these 2 statements on their own sound better than before, arguably, for the prosecution, in the context of her whole testimony, like I said, they do seem inconsistent with what she said earlier. So now the state seems to be leaving the jury with the impression that Jabbari maybe bends or stretches the truth, which is not where you want to leave things with such an important witness. Anyway, that's the end of Jabbari's testimony in front of the jury. The next witness after Grace Jabbari was Holly Blakey, a British choreographer and friend of Jabbari. Blakey testified that Jabbari called her after the alleged incident with Majors on March 25th and that Jabbari sent her photos of her injuries. Timing-wise, the calls apparently occurred midday London time, and the first message was at noon London time. Which, as a reminder, London is 5 hours ahead of New York, so noon in London is 7 a.m. in New York. Anyway, Blakey further testified that she and Jabbari spoke on the phone for over 4 to 5 hours from this point, with maybe 20 to 30 minute gaps in between. This does appear to fill the same period of time where Jabbari testified that she was sleeping in the bathroom/closet. Relatedly, apparently Jabbari texted Blakey at 11:07 a.m. New York time, which was maybe a few minutes before Jonathan Majors called 911. Anyway, when describing that conversation, Blakey said she sounded like I'd never heard her before, quite quiet, wrecked, sounded like she was in shock. Blakey also testified that she was a witness to Jabbari's relationship with Majors prior to the alleged incident. And she said that when she first saw the couple, she described them as very in love and very excited. However, she said, over time, I would say she lost a lot of weight, first thing I noticed, much thinner, and she saw her friends a lot less. She also said Jabbari would be in the house a lot more, and she seemed to have less interest in herself. She was working a lot less and was someone who's very driven and has a lot of energy for life. I saw a lot of that disappear. Now, of course, a big question here is what actually caused the things that Blakey observed in Jabbari. The prosecution, of course, wants the jury to conclude that this was a result of living in an abusive relationship. The defense, of course, wants the jury to conclude that it's any other reason other than that. But is there enough here to conclude one way or another? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Anyway, after Blakey concluded her testimony, Officer Brendan Swayne took the witness stand. Apparently, he is a DV prevention officer in New York's 10th Precinct and reviewed his personal body cam footage while testifying. Officer Swayne testified that Majors made the 911 call and he escorted Officer Swayne to the apartment when he arrived. Early on, he said that Jabbari was in a foggy state and her speech was a little slow. And now I've seen some conflicting reporting on what he testified regarding seeing or not seeing injuries. One account said that he did not notice any injuries on Jabbari, but another said he noticed Jabbari's middle finger was bruised and that she had a cut behind her right ear. And the cut that was noticed was apparently 1.5 inches long. There does seem to be some consistency with the rest, however. Officer Swayne then testified that he took Majors into another room to ask Jabbari privately what had happened to cause her injuries. And Officer Swayne testified that Jabbari whispered that she didn't want Majors right outside the room. But Officer Swayne testified that he asked Jabbari 5 to 10 times what happened at this point, and he said she was a little fuzzy in recollecting what happened. He also testified that it looked like she had passed out in the closet, and he said clearly that she was not in some area between the bathroom and the closet, but fully in the closet. This is different than the couple versions of Jabbari's testimony on this particular subject, where she initially said that she fell asleep in the bathroom, and then she later said that she woke up in sort of the area between the bathroom and the closet. Anyway, Officer Swayne further testified that Jabbari seemed scared and started to cry. And then he said, based on what we had so far, I knew bare minimum that there'd be a domestic incident report filed. There was a domestic incident that had occurred. Now, as far as the big conclusions in this trial are concerned, the jury may take that statement and either lean on it as someone who is usually in the practice of encountering DV situations through his job, or they might look at that conclusion and think that that is a hasty conclusion to make under these particular circumstances and then discard his testimony entirely. But another thing that is interesting to note here is that Jabbari's alleged injuries could also be seen on the body cam footage. Specifically, she was recorded pulling her shirt collar to show her neck, and she apparently used her right hand to include her right middle finger. She also used the same to fix her hair. Now, how much pressure she applied to the middle finger during these two movements and how gingerly she was maybe using that middle finger are not clear from the descriptions that I read. That said, it does seem to be relatively undisputed that at this point in the timeline, she did in fact have these injuries. So if she's able to use her middle finger at this point when it's apparently noticeably black and blue by some accounts, this could suggest that she could have been using it the night before as well. So again, I would want to see it for myself to try to determine what kind of pressure she's allowing on that middle finger while she's doing these various things. Now, on cross-examination, the defense did catch a couple inconsistencies. One was whether or not Officer Swayne had asked Jabbari if Majors had specifically hurt her finger. He initially said, "I might have said that." Then the body cam footage was played and he confirmed that he did indeed say it. Then the defense asked Officer Swayne about Majors' torn coat, which Majors had worn the night before. Initially, Officer Swayne said that he didn't see it. But then the body cam footage was played again, this time at the point where Majors was seen pointing out his torn coat to Officer Swayne. So this is an indication that his memory might not exactly be perfect from this particular event. And that's all I've got for Day 5 of New York v. Jonathan Majors. Day 5 was definitely a mixed bag, and whether you think that this was a win for the prosecution or the defense is likely up to interpretation and how familiar you are with the details of this case. But with that, what do you think about all this from Day 5? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more trial recaps like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.